Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another Men's Compass. I'm John Parker.
And I'm Dr. Daniel David.
And today we're talking about things that we wish we would have told our 20-year-old self, or if we could go back in time, what we would tell our 20-year-old self.
We need a time machine, I tell you.
Yeah, for sure. A time machine would be wonderful. And we definitely just having conversation for you 20-year-olds that may be listening and wondering like, hey, what do I need to be doing with my life? What direction should I be going in? What are some tips and tricks you'd have for me to kind of navigate this thing well?
Right. And if you're in your 30s, 40s, and even 50s, sometimes there are things that we're going to have to catch up on. So I think that it's important for all of us to realize that we got work to do. And so Men's Compass is about doing work and finding direction, working on ourselves, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So I'm going to ask you, since you're younger than me, just by a few months.
Gotcha.
Right? Okay. Yeah. That what would you tell your younger self if you went back into your 20s?
Oh, man, I think the biggest thing would be learning to get a perspective of the world, right? And not having my existence be limited to where I am. And for instance, like, when I was 20, I was in my third year of school because I started a little early, and my perspective was limited to my college campus, the girls I was trying to date, the friends that I had, and the college classes I was taking. I wasn't really like watching news or reading newspapers from foreign places. I wasn't really tuned into what was going around me like on a global perspective, and I was really just narrowly focused on what I had in front of me.
Wow. Okay. So, and just for context, where were you at school?
I was at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, so that had its own shenanigans.
It had its own shenanigans, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess what would you do then? What would you do differently, or what would you tell yourself if you went back into time?
Yeah, if it was a matter of just looking at like perspective, right? So making sure that when I was having thoughts of things, or when I was thinking through things, or when I was trying to make decisions that would affect my life on a larger scale than just whether or not I'm going to wake up and go to class, that I would have more sources of information that could help me make a better decision, instead of just solely relying on the people that I was hanging out with or the people that were in my peer group. I didn't have a lot of mentors at the time. Matter of fact, I don't think I had any mentors. I really was just hanging out with people that was my age, and doing the same things that I was doing, and I rarely, if ever, sought help. I think I may have went to my academic advisor a time or two just to kind of help with classes and making sure I was on the right track there. But I definitely didn't have any older men in my life that were pouring into me.
So you would want that for yourself then?
Oh, for sure, definitely. I probably could have avoided a lot of heartaches and bumping my head, and unnecessary loans, which we'll talk about at some other point.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So you definitely would look for a mentor. What else?
I think I would. No, I think I probably would do better at making sure that the education that I was receiving was actually going to be something that was going to be beneficial long term. At my school, and I think it's the same at most schools, when you're looking through the course catalog and when you're looking at the classes that are electives or general education, whatever the term is, I often chose stuff based on like what is easier. Or they had an app at the time, or not an app, a website that you can go to, and it was like Rate Your Professor, and you can kind of see who was hard and how they graded and the tests they would give and all of that. And so sometimes I shortchanged myself by taking easier classes, quote unquote, or classes that were given by professors that didn't want much from you, but it didn't really help me in the long run.
Point.
Yeah, it was fun, to get through classes and raise my GPA potentially, but it didn't do a lot for me long term.
So you definitely would pick harder classes or more interesting classes?
More demanding, potentially, not everything being necessarily easy, but just stuff that would push me, that would require me to do more and not just coast. Although, in college it's good to coast every now and again. You want to take classes that you can kind of float by, but I did that too many times. It was too much float.
Many times. So is that what you tell, just for our listeners' sake, we're both therapists. We work with men, mainly men. So what do you tell your guys when you get a guy who's in his 20s, especially starting out in his 20s? What do you tell them?
Well, I think the biggest piece depends on where they are in stage of life, right? So every 20-year-old now, especially in the society we live in, is not necessarily a college student. I mean, some
Right.
guys may be pursuing careers, they may be picking up a trade, they may be trying to be professional gamers. You know what I mean? There's so many angles to go in. I think it's really 20s are about narrowing your focus, which is what I didn't do. I was a jack of all trades and kind of was just all over the place. So I think if I could go back in time, I would rather utilize my 20s as a time to kind of narrowly focus what I was doing. In school, I was the news director for the school radio department. I was majoring in African American studies, so I was, just taking a breadth of classes that was dealing with the African diaspora, chasing girls around, trying to play basketball all the time, playing video games. And so I enjoyed life and I enjoyed school, but I didn't really have a streamlined approach to the things I was doing. And so it put me in a position where I was kind of probably overexerting myself.
Right.
And it just didn't work. At the time it felt fine, but then at 20, you can sleep 4 hours a day and do that for a week and just be just fine. But it just didn't propel me in a direction. It took me 5 years to graduate for a reason, because I was all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you broke one of my rules, which is when guys come to me, I tell them, first of all, I know this is hard, especially in college campuses. I used to work on Long Island University campus for a little while, and I've dealt with guys for a while. But dating can be a disaster for education. I'll tell you what, especially when you're paying, $100,000 for an education.
Yeah.
I've had guys come to me and they could be 30, 40 years old, and they'll say to me, when I do some assessment, say, hey, what was your college years like? A lot of them say, well, I partied a lot, I drank a lot, I used a lot, and then of course, I got into a relationship, and my heart was broken. It was my first love, my first serious love, and my heart was broken. And around maybe sophomore year, I decided to leave college. And
oh, wow.
And I've heard this story more than once. I've heard guys get into deep relationships and then have heartbreak, and emotionally they tailspin into darkness, and then I'll ask so what was her name, because this is like now they're in their 40s and late 30s, right? Yeah, I can barely remember her name. The whole idea here is that we postpone our lives, or we waste so much time based on a relationship. And the first thing I just encourage guys to do is don't get into, date for fun.
Right.
If a date for fun, that's fine. If you're going to get emotionally attached and too deep into a relationship in your 20s and you're trying to go through school, it's probably going to be a disaster, and you're paying for it. You're going to pay for it in more ways than one.
Right.
So I tell guys, maybe senior year of college, when you're going to graduate and you're going to get through, you can start a serious relationship, because then you're going to graduate and go into the career world, right? But for number one rule for me is, I tell guys, please don't date, don't be too serious in college, especially.
It's interesting too, because my number one, and I wonder if this is like a cultural phenomenon, because I didn't pledge, but I had a lot of friends that pledged. I've had family members that pledged the Greek fraternity, and I think that what I've come to find out, that there's a difference even in the style of fraternity that you're into. I have my wife, she got her PhD in biomedical engineering, and her father went to Georgia Tech as she did, and he was like one of the first few black students to graduate from Georgia Tech.
Wow.
I don't remember if he was the first class, but he was one in the first grouping, maybe first 20, first 50. And he was wondering, how are these guys come in class? Maybe they don't come to class. They're acing all their tests. They're getting all these good grades. Come to find out, they had study guides, right? Things that were passed down from class to class to class based on them being in certain fraternities. And the fraternities had mass-produced test guides and study guides or whatever. And
wow.
So he's studying all this, doing all this extra stuff, not knowing that, hey, they already had the answers, and they just needed to study the answers to learn how to do the problems or whatever. And it may not have been the exact answers from the exact test, but it was at least a guide that helped them study better and be more accurate in their studies. But oftentimes, in my experience and the experience of family members, I've had friends and family members who have pledged these predominantly African-American fraternities and lose their scholarship because of the pledging process. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you don't go to class, you don't see social people socially. You're doing whatever shenanigans they have you doing as far as the pledging process, and as a result, your grades slip, and that happens. It happens time after time after time that these guys would pledge and want to be a Kappa or want to be an Alpha or want to be an Iota or want to be this, want to be that, and because of their inactivity in school, it causes
Right.
their grades to fail. And I have somebody very dear to me that it happened to, and I don't know how that's offset the trajectory of his life, but he definitely lost his scholarship. And it's been hard for him to finish school since then.
Yeah, nowadays, I mean, the way that school costs and things like that is just it's sorry to, hear those things about young men who are really needing to, what are the 20s for? The
Right.
20s are really to launch your life.
Mm-hmm.
And the sooner the better. I mean, I understand that some kids can start in high school and really launch, but college years are really important. Even if you don't go to college, figuring out a career, figuring out a path,
Mm-hmm.
staying on that path, because I think it's important that a lot of guys just, they're too scattered and too spread out that
Yeah.
they don't really put all their energy into one direction, and so they end up not launching or getting lost, getting confused. So I like what you said about mentoring. I think it's important for guys to have mentors,
Yeah.
especially in their early 20s. Find someone, an older gentleman who has a good life, meaning the life that has integrity, and you can see where he's successful and do things, um, that he's doing things that really matter
Mm-hmm.
and make a difference. And then, try to get some mentoring from guys like these. It's so important to have mentors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think two things are important. I think staying out of unnecessary debt, and then also like maybe a couple things. I'll just start with unnecessary debt and travel. Right. I think that
Right.
if you can pay for school without having to go into debt, again, as we'll have another conversation about that, I think that's a wise way to go. I was fortunate enough, I took out loans which I shouldn't have taken out. I was just being greedy. But in most school systems, and especially in the U.S., you can go to get your AA first, or go to junior college, which is
Right.
more affordable, and then transfer to that 4 year that you want to go to. But for some reason, there's a social stigma that I don't quite understand. To where if you don't start off at that 4 year, if you don't go straight to university, that you're somehow either behind the curve or you're not as successful, or I think there's a psychological play that happens oftentimes with people, and they get caught up in this idea of going straight to 4 year, and they take that route, and then it causes them to have unnecessary debt as opposed to transferring in. And I think that if I didn't necessarily have to do that, you know what I mean, but if it was a matter of being wiser about not taking on debt, because for me, most of my debt for my undergrad was for accommodations and living. Like the first 2 years I stayed on in the dorms, and so with the dorms you have your housing fees, and then fees for my food allowances was built into that, and all that, so just eating and housing was a big chunk of my school loans. And if I say I stayed at home and went to a local JC and then transferred, or if I had maybe even left and went to a JC that was in the area of the university that I wanted to go to, but there was more options, and I didn't necessarily have to jump into signing these school loans.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to I know that, we need a living wage in this country. And I know that a lot of young people struggle with minimum wage and low wage, or being underpaid and not full time. But if you can work, there's no shame in staying home. I tell parents nowadays, we're not living in the same world that I grew up in.
Right.
So, we're living in a different world after the financial crash. So
Mm-hmm.
guys, don't be ashamed if you're staying home for a little while longer. And if that helps you to afford maybe working a job and paying as you go for school, and yeah, a community college,
Yeah.
because ultimately you can do 2 years at a lower cost and then transfer in as much as you can to another school
Mm-hmm.
and possibly get the loans, a little bit of loans later on, and
Yeah.
then graduate from a 4-year college.
Yeah.
Um, but there's no shame in staying home a little bit longer and saving your money, working hard, and paying your school bill as you go,
Yeah.
and then transferring.
Man, I know a guy who was a poker player and paved his way for college. He was playing professional. He
Well,
was playing poker, not in like back, in somebody's house, but you know what I'm saying. He had skill, I guess. He had a strategy, and he would go and I don't suggest going into a gambling
I
situation.
was going to say, are we going to talk about poker?
But there's creative ways. I know another guy who's a professional gamer nowadays, right? Because you can do that. Started up a Twitch account, got a bunch of followers, and people were donating to him, and he was just playing games. So there's creative ways that didn't exist when I was in school. I wish somebody would have paid me to play video games.
Oh,
that would have been amazing. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, so something fun. That's something light. So what about travel? What's your take on travel in your 20s?
Well, I mean, I traveled because I spent a lot of time in Asia. Traveled to South Korea, and then eventually I went into West Africa with Senegal and then Abidjan and these other places. And I'll tell you what, traveling is so important. I probably need to do more traveling in the United States than I have done in Europe and in Asia and Africa. Right. Right. But the point is that it opens up your mind. It gave me a different perspective on the world. Coming from the Midwest and then living in New York City for 20 years, I had a different perspective. But, I remember the days when I was a young kid growing up in the Midwest, and, we don't get that exposure to other cultures. And so when I moved to New York City and then started traveling around the world a bit, I realized that, America wasn't the center of the world.
Right.
And
what?
there were other ways. There were what? Okay. I don't want to shock anybody, right. But, I realized that there were other cultures and, other ways of doing things. And I used to see the ugly American syndrome, everywhere, well, we have air conditioning or whatever, kind of crap that people want to say.
Yeah.
But culture, other languages, other countries, they expand your mind. They help you to really understand that we do live in a very diverse world. And so I ask guys, go on your hero's journey, go out and travel, go explore the world, and then come back and then go to school. Sometimes the English way, I like the English gap year. In England, they have a gap year.
That started in England because that's becoming a thing here. And one of my young cousins graduated from high school a couple years ago, and I did some research. I was like, gap year, like that would have been great to have a gap year.
Yeah, absolutely. In England, I went to Oxford in England, and a lot of the students there had, the undergrads come in after a year of doing service in other countries and volunteering and things like that. They take a gap year so that they can get a little bit more mature. I think that helps to emotionally mature and then to explore possibilities as far as jobs and interests and things like that. And then when they come into their undergrad, they're a lot more settled and a lot more aware of the world, right?
Okay. So the English do things right. I don't like their
once in a while.
I don't like their warm beer, but that gap year sounds good.
Right, and they have bad teeth. I'm sorry, but we can go on that subject another day.
I got you. I mean, I just don't give the UK too many props. So I just that's a thing that they can pat their back on. I'm like, all right, gap year, we do that right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love their philosophy about getting out into the world. We need to do that in America a little bit more. We need to have more cultural experiences.
Yeah. Speaking of cultural, this may not be as cultural, but culinary skills. I feel like developing a breadth of the things that you can cook, and do. I mean, that could be a lifelong thing, but I think if I did a better job of expanding my palate in my 20s, I probably would have eaten better. My idea of a good meal in my 20s was like sloppy joes and homemade French fries. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was it.
And you stayed that thin?
I mean, I got high metabolism. That's probably why I was eating all the time. I was burning up those empty calories, man. So.
Wow, that would have clogged my arteries.
And it may have done that too, but I played a lot of basketball. So I think one of the things that I had a good balance of in my 20s was making sure that I exercised well to a certain extent, and that I can't say that I ate as good as I should have, but I definitely would tell my 20-year-old self or 20s self like to take better care of your internals. You know what I mean? I didn't do a lot of drinking in my 20s. Then I didn't do drugs. That wasn't my thing at the time. Not that it's my thing now, but at the time,
Right.
right, drugs weren't my thing. But I definitely ate a lot of trash. I didn't eat as well as I could have. And now as I'm learning, like, hey, food, you can eat a meal without meat. You know what I'm saying? You can
Right.
make things taste well if you have the right herbs and spices. And I wish that I would have done more exploratory cooking during that time.
Definitely. I think that guys need to take care of their health way earlier than they usually do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I see guys in their 30s, late 30s, and they're already overweight,
Mm-hmm.
and they have health issues. And our modern time, I mean, sure, good food costs money, so I understand
Mm-hmm.
that there's an economic pressure there, but we can still make healthier choices, and we need to. A lot of guys, I don't think, eat well for their not only their bodies but
Mm-hmm.
for their brains.
Yeah.
I'm really big on mental health and eating for your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So getting your good fish oils and other good proteins and vegetables and antioxidants,
Mm-hmm.
things that are going to help you, because our brain is what we need throughout our lives, and most guys don't realize that.
Yeah.
It's our biggest asset.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
uh, a good diet is really important.
Yeah, and something I found out, I think in my mid 20s, there's this book called Eat Right for Your Blood Type. And
Oh,
basically, the doctor then, unless he's been found out to be a quack recently, but basically said that there's certain foods, whether it's grain, and he breaks it all down: grains, nuts, fishes, meats, dairy, um, everything that you can think of as a food group. He basically says, based on your blood type, there's certain ways that your body responds to certain foods, and usually, and he breaks things down into neutral, avoid, and then things that are good for you to eat. And I'm O negative, and not only am I like the universal donor, but I can only get O negative blood. So as a side note, find out what your blood type is, just for the sake of knowing whether or not you need to store some of your own blood. So
right, right,
I need to be donating blood so that I can have some for myself if something happens.
right.
As well as the fact that, hey, if there's a potentiality that your blood type is setting you up for success or failure based on what you're eating, why not set yourself up for success? And it's tough because two of the things that are on my list that I love a lot are pistachios and catfish. And those are two things that I need
Really?
to avoid. Yeah. And also citrus fruits. High citric acid stuff makes me sweat. And all my life, I wonder, like, when I eat certain candies that have all this citric acid in it, or orange juice or kiwi fruits, why I would start sweating and have like a internal reaction. Come to find out that my blood type and those particular things don't necessarily, it becomes toxic after a while. I don't need a whole bunch of it. Otherwise, it just becomes toxic to my body.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I've heard of that, but I didn't know anyone who actually used it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you would sweat then. Well,
Yeah,
that's
literally, like if I would eat oranges or drink too much orange juice, like I said, kiwi fruits, most candy like Starburst and Skittles and all that have citric acid as a base for it for whatever reasons. Certain sodas, like it was just a bunch of stuff. I'm like, man, this is really. I just thought it was, I just thought it was normal, to whatever extent. But then come to find out, no, that's my body telling me, hey, sir, you need to stop eating or drinking that.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So you would tell your 20-year-old self that, and then is there anything else you
I think
work on?
another thing, as we kind of wrap up, so maybe we just give one or
Right,
two more each, but just
right,
thinking through like experiences. I think in my 20s, I wasn't really building memories. I was just doing stuff because I felt like it was a thing I needed to do.
right,
Fortunately, back then, we didn't have camera phones and all that other stuff, so I had to be real intentional about taking pictures and writing notes and letters, and just doing certain things. But I didn't build a lot of memories. I didn't build a lot. I didn't have a lot of experiences, and I think the stuff you're saying, like traveling and doing different things, but just even in my neighborhood and just even with my friends, man, it wasn't a lot of stuff that we did that was long lasting. I mean, the biggest thing that we did whenever we played video games, to say it was a sports game, we keep records of like wins and losses and how many steals and points we scored and put it on this board, and that was kind of like the thing to see who was the best at playing the video game. But we didn't do a lot of things together. It wasn't until our 30s that we actually started taking trips that were meaningful. We go fishing together, we go camping together, we go hiking together, and we just didn't build a lot of memories. And I don't have a lot of memories or memorable things outside of parties and remember that time that you had too much to drink and you threw somebody up against the wall. You know what I mean? Like that was
right.
our
Yeah,
like that was the memories. And so we didn't build a lot of meaningful memories. And I think that's something that I would encourage guys to do.
Yes, collect memories, not things.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For
Don't
sure.
become a hoarder.
Yeah.
I think one last thing that I would offer up for guys in their 20s is get a hold of your finances. Even though we don't probably make a lot of money, at the start of life,
right.
It's really important to learn how to use money and to save money from the very beginning and invest money, because ultimately we can work hour after hour and just go out and blow the money away. And
right.
then, and we have nothing to show for it. So my big thing with guys is, hey, learn how to invest, even if it's a little bit. Learn how to save, even if it's a little bit. It'll eventually add up. And it's important to start out early in life with financial education. So, if you don't know about money, ask someone who seems to be doing well with their money. And it's not about just making loads of money, so that you can blow money. It's about making, a living, and then being able to save so that you can have a future and have some security. So that's a huge issue for guys that come in to see me. So it's just a topic that we often talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And one last thing I'll add, just for fun's sake, is learning another language, a second or third language. Just being able to be culturally diverse in your speech. And it opens up a lot of doors, whether it's for travel for the future or if it's just making sure that you can have communication with people in your neighborhood. But just learning a second language does something to your brain. It gets your juices flowing. And I think it's a good idea.
And yeah, we're in a country that, there's so much diversity, and yet we only speak one language.
Right.
So, I learned Korean many years ago, and it would really open my eyes and open my opportunities up. And, I'm kind of taking German right now. And so I think it's just important to learn languages for your own health sake. It's been known to help with your brain. And brain development. So it's something that I think that guys should start really early. The sooner you learn a language, the less accent you have.
That's good.
They said if you learn a language by 16 years old, you're probably less likely to have an accent.
All right, that works. So is that a shot at the South right now? You have something against drawl or the Northeastern or the Boston guys?
That's just going back to English school.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if you're in Boston or somewhere in the Northeast or you're in the South, your drawl and your chowder, accent can be taken care of by learning another language. All right. Cool.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Well, thank y'all for tuning in. This has been a great time. Men's Compass, man, we're just here to kind of help guys develop, man. We give you tasty tidbits that can kind of help you with life, with love, with romance, with school. We got it all. We appreciate you for listening in. I'm Jon Parker.
And I'm Dr. Daniel David.
All right. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.